You played Zero and Yakuza Kiwami, and then now you're doing Judgment, then Lost Judgment. The whole series seems really good and fun, and I wish more people play them. I see. Um, yeah. Um, in terms of I've broken down analyses when it comes to these when it comes to playing video games or like the gaming industry and whatnot. And often I play games for perspective. And yeah, it's not a modern trend at the moment. Even then, even with the increasing success of RGG Studios, most of its designs are non-traditional and still quite niche. Uh, yeah, it'd be nice if more people enjoy them. You know, it's nice to have a larger community, maybe different perspectives, uh, increase the variety of discussions with game series. Uh, this is my ninth game in a row. So I started back in March. I started back in March. Yakuza 0, Kiwami 1, Kiwami 2, Yakuza 3 remastered, 4 remastered, 5 remastered, The Song of Life, Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. And yesterday we concluded our Yakuza Like a Dragon. And what I typically do is I do achievement runs. So all of those were just whatever the achievements require. That would mean having to 100% 6 of the 8. And then now we're playing Judgment and Lost Judgment. Judgment and Lost Judgment will come right before completing those will come right before Like a Dragon Gaiden comes out in November. And right now we're on the MSQ only run. For the combat oriented RGG titles, I tend to do an MSQ only or MSQ focus run first. Then we do completion. Then we do a victory lap. You feel like Western players especially aren't used to long cutscenes and little action at times and it turns them off? Western players. I think that's fair to say. Um Largely I would agree with you by the way you phrased it. I don't think it turns them off. They're indifferent. So there's a difference between apathy and being repulsed. They're indifferent. It doesn't interest them. So they don't actively hate long cutscenes. Just right now, in terms of and what you mean by Western players is probably Westernized culture, modernism. So the modern gaming in the Western world is input heavy. So it's a game focus. Typically, the gold standards tend to be input focused, and cutscenes and narrative designs is a trade off for input focused gameplay. So typically, when there you can't introduce input in this type of game design, so it does take away from that. There was a time, so this is the current trend, right? I'm not sure how old you are or how long you've been around the gaming scene, but the golden age of the CRPGs were well before this time. So it was before a new gold standard was placed in, and that's usually championed in terms of the RPG subgenre. It's championed by FromSoft, and we're kind of trending away from that now. But because of whenever a market, like an industry, gets an incredibly high standard, like a gold standard, rare gem, and then those who want to mirror it immediately, they start setting a new trend. So that trend is set by the action RPG uh, genre. Okay, so it's before your time when CRPGs were king, which is CRPGs tend to be incredibly text heavy, text driven stuff. And it was even before a time of long cutscenes, just no inputs, lots and lots of reading in the Western world. So like the D&D periods and the Baldur's Gates and Planescape Torment, the years of BioWare. Um, then it ironically right now Baldur's Gate 3 might usher in a new trend, but right now the next couple years we're going to see the sci-fi trend of the role-playing, the Western role-playing sci-fi trend. That's what's kind of in the transition period now. So it's actually leading away from what you're saying now. So it's been like that for a bit because of the action RPG genre that was established, especially gold standards like Nintendo Zelda and FromSoft's Souls games, right? It is trending away from that now, though. However, it might not be the type of cutscenes you're thinking of. These are cinematic cutscenes. Back in the day, the cutscenes were almost entirely just text, lots of text, and this choice matters kind of adventure games. And also point and click. Yeah, point and click is a really big thing because of technical. It's a lot of times technical obstacles. In the 90s, I would say in the 90s, there was an incredible golden age of point and click adventure games. And point and click adventure games don't have necessary cutscenes, they just have animations and text. There's now they're niche, so they're like indie style. So some games like Double Fine Studios and things like Monkey Island, right? Monkey Island have made some returns. Double Fine is one of the older ones that have made a return for those type of things. I look forward to seeing how well RGG continues to steer the course. At the moment, um, you're going, if you look at the release stuff, all the ones that have been invested in Western fantasy. So Western fantasy would include Lovecraft, dark fantasy, Tolkien's, Game of Thrones like intrigue, like very either low fantasy or high fantasy Western settings. Final Fantasy 16 is not an exception. It's set in Western fantasy. Every follow-up title generally goes in a trend that reflects the old 90s, where when Western fantasy takes hold, the follow-up are sci-fis. So FromSoft, for example, is Armor Core. Today is Armor Core's launch day, right? So there's that. We have your Cyberpunk, right? Phantom Liberties is continuing with their sci-fi thing. 2 or 3 announcements of sci-fi Hoyoverse-like games, even on the anime front, right? The live service front. So there are going to be a lot of sci-fi games coming out soon. And those may or may not have cutscenes. But in terms of like the storytelling, yeah, it's been really favorable towards input gamers. So gamers that require input. And also secondary to that, like input is king, then mechanics. Input first, then mechanics, then story. So story builds legacy, but generally speaking, it also has a problem with the current models. For Yakuza, or Like a Dragon series, including Judgment. So for the RGG series, stories used to be installments, and then the installments had to continue releasing. But these things have become a little less popular because live service games promote the same type of legacy building, but with inputs. So what I mean by this is um, Judgment is very important to me as a title, even when I haven't played Judgment, because it builds on the legacy of RGG in both technological aspects, inputs, and then if you play all the Like a Dragon series, they're all attached to each other. So every additional title strengthens its title. That's the strength of narrative games. Narrative games introduce world building, and in the world links all of it. So Judgment is tied to Like a Dragon because of Kamurocho, the city, and that creates that sentimentalism that the older designs have. But the newer designs, you can have this without constantly buying new games. They're the live service models. So live service models mirror the second coming of investment, which is what Blizzard introduced with World of Warcraft. When Blizzard introduced MMORPGs, that is that legacy building. You live in a world that is perpetually updated over and over again. But that was the subscription model. And now you have live service models. So that world continue to be persistent and they regularly update. So the reason why that is supplanting what RGG is fighting uphill for is that RGG has to invest a lot of money, release at a game at a risk, and you have to encourage players to pick up that upfront cost over and over again and the waiting period. So, but it does build a legacy. But in a live service model, you don't have to necessarily do that. That world persists continuously. It is updated on a bi-monthly basis. Usually that's the standard upkeep. And then microtransactions fill in the cost of upkeep for that game. And the longer you play a live service game, the more you're sentimentally invested. Just like getting someone, so if you're asking someone, hey, play these 8 games back to back to develop the same legacy, you could start a new game with a live service model, and the longer you play it, the more that universe or the world, the platform that the live service is built on will continue to grow. So it's kind of mirroring what RGG does with Kamurocho. So everything makes Kamurocho live, right? All the characters, if the city and the world they build will live beyond those characters, so they can keep putting more characters in there. Regrettably, this model is very costly. It's very risky for the developer. It's hard to manage for the business. Thank you, Sega and RGG, for taking it's great for me. I love this stuff, but it is very risky business-wise, and players have to take the leap of buying it this way, as compared to sample all you want and decide when you want to invest in a live service model. So in a way, I'm very hopeful, like you are, that more people will enjoy the old school format of world building, where you use an entire franchise to build a world, and then that world gets populated with content or creativity and whatnot. Sometimes you may make the argument these big projects come with higher qualities, but those higher qualities also come with higher risks. And a flopped Like a Dragon game, which may not happen as much because of its long legacy, can cause the series to end. Meanwhile, in a live service model, if you release a 3-month update and it just didn't land, you just wait for the next 3 months. They come in smaller increments to build the world. So the greatest model for something that's as massive as Kamurocho is now for their legacy, like 15 plus years of legacy, a great example would be the Hoyoverse. Their Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail and soon to be Zen Zen Zenless, they're all in a particular universe, and that universe is the investment of everything that's in it. And love this because the setting for this is modernism. And as a multicultural person, I am a Western player, but I have an Eastern background. So I'm both, I'm East meets West, as a, if it wasn't already clear, since I'm speaking American English. I love this series because it's unique in the sense that they have to do the scary thing, which is they have to tiptoe around modern culturalism. And it's really brave and it's very clever and it's super challenging. And I admire RGG and Sega for taking risks, having to constantly move this game forward in its modern age. Um, and they're moving forward in a crazy way. They're moving their next game, right? Yakuza, or Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, is going to integrate Hawaii into it. And that's getting closer and closer to home. I don't live on the west coast of the United States, but I'm more of an East Coast Asian person, and it is a startling difference between East Coast and West Coast Asians, but it's fantastic. I don't know if you have a specific investment in it, but I like these games that continue to bridge cultures and modernism in a way that isn't like Rockstar's approach, which is to keep on enhancing input. Like Rockstar does build worlds, but the worlds are built for the player playground, not to build something to tell a story. They do tell stories that promote, you know, the stuff that those players have, but it's not the same as modernism, where you have to depict uh, realistic fiction, but actually autobiographical nature, like depiction of Japanese culture looking at other cultures, diversity that's facing the Japanese culture. I do get a lot of kick out of the combat and the input, but the slice of life is what makes me play these games nonstop, from Yakuza 0 all the way to Judgment now. It's the slice of life aspects, all the little nuances, and I make a lot of commentary on nuances of culture and perspective. The combat's pretty good. Yeah, it's I express it so many times because it's exciting. This next full year, right? This next maybe 365 days is going to be big because RGG is in a transition period and they're gambling. And I love selfishly that creators and developers like RGG has the backing of their publisher group, Sega, to take risks like this. And it might not be receptive to a lot of people. It might be a little bit harder to get into, but it's unapologetic. And it's been a being growing up in the 90s, that when video games started, right? Like the modernization of video games started. I went through most of the period outside like the Atari and the Commodore 64 period. The early days of gaming was, it's always interesting to see where they go. It's not modern gaming industry is like, oh, this is Spider-Man. And then another game comes out, oh, this is Spider-Man, but anime. It's like, oh, this is Spider-Man, but another region, that kind of thing, where you go to play games expecting it to have a similar experience. And like that's great if you're an input person. Like if you're really focused on like having the same combat feel or the tight controls of something, you're going to gravitate towards those games, and you hope that the context changes so that you can use that similar tight feeling you require, the standards, and then experience secondarily context, which may be a different story, a different world. For me, it's primarily the story and the world building. The mechanics and the input is secondary. And the nice thing about RGG is it's always different, so I don't really expect to hone in on a level of skill or something in input that will carry and trend. In fact, I would be shocked one day if RGG just did the exact same thing in terms of input mechanics, or input and mechanics. It's expected, if you play enough RGG games, to know that it may look the same to other people watching it, but it definitely plays different every time. And the modern gaming industry right now, they focus on iterating and refining a foundation. RGG just throws it out the window most of the time. Like, oh, you like a game that was hyper aggressive and everyone just fall over? The next game is going to be like everything blocks. Like, you still have the same basic inputs, but the mechanics completely flips all the time. And even when they're trying to make really little changes, it becomes so obtrusive that it's just a fun ride. And what I mean by fun is it can be both discomforting, annoying. How do I feel about the turn-based combat? I really like it. I mean, my background is in high complexity game mechanics. So turn-based combat tends to be the vehicle that balances high complexity mechanics. So typically, I had a lot to say about ending Yakuza Like a Dragon recently. However, it's really early times, and RGG does a thing where if you're really invested in a specific subgenre of games, they do the surface level to give you a taste. So they like streamlined dipping, and Yakuza Like a Dragon is a streamlined dipping of turn-based combat. Honestly, if I did not have an executive breathing down my neck about making sure my next game succeeds, the next game in Yakuza would be a TRPG, a tactical turn-based RPG game, because they could do that too. They've done something somewhat similar to a lot of things, and that's what they are known for. So when someone asks me how I feel about things, it's a great casual thing. It's a casual turn-based combat. It's incredibly accessible when you understand what you're in for RGG. It isn't the depth of someone who is specifically looking for turn-based combat. It's depth enough for someone who's looking for the RGG story. So if you're really into turn-based combat, it will leave things to be desired. But if you want turn-based combat, but you're really here for the story, Like a Dragon is it. If you're really here for a beat 'em up or a semi-fighting game, but you really want the story, that's what you're here for. Otherwise, you're looking into other subgenres of games that really focuses on it. So it does just enough to satisfy the turn-based combat fundamentals. And all the other stuff that lacks, I put my hat into it. There's a lot of, it's a very surface level stuff. Will they expand on it? They probably will, sort of, but often they're probably going to turn it on its head in some way. The main line, as far as I know, is confirmed. It's not confirmed, but it's likely to be turn-based. When you play enough games of RGG, they come in pairs. So like Judgment is kind of like Lost Judgment, right? Not just the whole story context thing. Yakuza 0 is like Kiwami 1 in design because they're next to each other chronologically. The remake of Kiwami 1 actually followed Yakuza 0. So you have the stance, the style thing, right? And then Kiwami 2 actually followed Yakuza 6. So those two, you'll see that they're really lined up in terms of their core mechanics outside of the whole slice of life and story stuff, right? And sub-story. Those are independent of mechanics. And then you're going to find that 3 is the black sheep. It's the one that was a new generation. And then 4 and 5 are very similar. They're gonna be like elaborating. So they tend to go cold turkey a lot of times on a third game. So this next one, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, is the pair for Yakuza Like a Dragon. So it will probably be a more expanded turn-based combat thing. The more, the merrier. And then after that, I would take a gamble that Yakuza or Like a Dragon 9 is going to redefine everything again. Just something else. It could still be turn-based, but it would flip that system. Because every third game, they do a flip in something. And that's what is so exciting. In my opinion, I'm personally biased towards this because it feels like the game design is pandering to me. I'm a gamer that doesn't like to be able to expect what the game is gonna be like. The story is all generally always compelling to me. I like hearing people's stories, their lives, and whatnot. I do that all the time. And you might be thinking, well, these are fictional people. It's like, well, it's the story the developers are telling me. I'm thinking of the developers as I experience these stories. I'm more of a creative perspective person. So I always think about what the developers are thinking, what the publishers are thinking. And I see that you do have an eye for the perspective of what Western players do. So yeah, I do spend most of my time talking about perspective. So how it fits in the modern standard, cultural differences in preference, what are the changing times, and RGG, if you like this like world they're building, it's literally trying to mirror the changing times. And when you play through the games, it will be very obvious. You see the shifts. Like Kiwami 1 was 2005. The vast majority of the events happened in 2005. After the economic boom from Yakuza 0, the 1990 and on. And then Yakuza Like a Dragon is 2019, which is the same year as Judgment. It happened in 2019. So the paradigm shifts in culturalism and what they have to face and problems may seem similar, but it has a different context. Like you have smartphones, all that other great stuff, and it creates perspective, which is wonderful. There's a slight digression, but it's what makes it. To me, my purpose of playing these games is to talk about perspective and cultures. Just as a reminder or like a disclaimer, my background, I'm Chinese American, and the stuff that they tackle now, finally in the modern age, a lot of times it deals with diversity or clashes of cultures, and they in like Yakuza 6 and on, even 5 to some extent, and 4. So from 4 and on, they do tackle the whole idea of multiculturalism in Japan. And then now, in the next game, I can finally see a Japanese outside perspective on the portrayal of at least the Hawaiian culture, which is still kind of closer, bridging with Japanese people than it is over here. Who knows? Like a Dragon 10 might finally visit New York City, which is a central hub. It is still the most populated city with the highest density in Asian cultures in the United States. So it'll be a wild dream in Like a Dragon 10 or 11. Somehow they got clearance and all the political stuff, all the licensing issues, and the depiction, because New York City, just like Kamurocho, they had to secure all the licenses, populate the world, faithfully reconstruct the place. So whenever you see the credit rolls, you see 30 to 40 plus businesses and brands. If they can't secure them, they have to create like a pseudo version of them, which have to clear off like international relationships and all that. So it's really brave. It's a series that literally bridges cultures, and there are very few of those. There are very few of those that take modern age have another country get so close to depicting other countries and other cultures through their lens. And in the United States, it's kind of a sensitive topic because a lot of times we are Americans are inherently hyper focused on individualism, and that individualism tends to be multiculturalism. And it's just a little thing. I'm a Chinese, like a ABC, an American born Chinese, so it's my life. I live it every single day. So I talk about it every single day. So it might seem a little rehearsed, but I love it. I love the mix of like having to deal and juggle with different perspectives. All right, we're heading to ADC.
I've heard a bit about this place before. But the ADDC, isn't it just one part of a larger organization?
Oh yeah, and any game that offers 2 vocal tracks, we play through both vocal tracks. That's just it. I compare and contrast how voice acting in different cultures. In this case, RGG has a close relationship with American culture. They've been writing the localization and the subtitles with American idioms. So all the American humor and the translation and mannerisms were American through all the games until this game. This is the first game that has dual. This is the first game that was released in Japanese, then dubbed in English. Yakuza Like a Dragon, I would argue, was actually simultaneously written for both languages because you can tell remarkably the difference between the first one they did here and then Like a Dragon came out, Yakuza Like a Dragon, then Lost Judgment. So you can see the maturity in their writing and then their casting and their coaching for their writing. I just played Judgment Side case where a character was wearing an Apple Watch basically, and Yagami was kind of clueless, and I thought it was pretty neat because it feels like a very American thing. I thought it was fun. Yeah. So here's the thing. In Judgment, there was like an interview for this game, and they were talking about how to reach to a larger audience, right? Reach to a larger audience. So they were resistant to having English cast yet until it got separated from Kiryu Saga. The Kiryu Saga was baked in deep into Japanese culture. And a lot of times that's very appropriate because when you start thinking about working up a game, if it's not ground up for topics that are both experienced in Japan and English, often there's a loss in translation when they hire maybe a dubbing crew or whatnot. Judgment, when they started doing this, Judgment was kind of like that, where they developed this and it's still steeped in like Japanese isms. So a lot of times, but the thing is, it's a little bit of a bridge because in Western society, there's a huge precedence for detective stories that integrate film noir. And then there's a lot of general feels that you can use to cast to normalize the English cast. So film noir tends to have the cast that they have, with a few exceptions that I found a little bit weird, but it's fine. But largely the cast feels normalized to an American audience because we have true crime stories. And like the Western world, actually one of the most popular genres that consistently performs through the years, not like dipping or increasing, are true crime stuff. So you got they have references to develop, to bridge. So in Japan, Japanese cinema also has a lot of, Asian cinema in general has a lot of cop dramas and detective, like true crime stuff. So it's a natural interface that it feels natural to have the American isms in the English cast. In Yakuza Like a Dragon, though, they did one better, in my opinion. They did one better as in not their apples and oranges, but what I mean is the way they did it was they developed the game and the topics that the cast were going to talk about that's appropriate in both English and Japanese. And what even more is the Japanese and the English feels different because they wrote how Americans would contextualize the joke, the delivery, and Japanese people experience the same thing, only their delivery is different. So instead of like this game where it kind of feels on top of each other, basically what I expect is I'm going to switch over for the second playthrough, which will be the legend playthrough at the end. When I hear the Japanese, the feel is going to be largely on top of each other because film noir and cop drama are very similar when in terms of execution between Western and Eastern cinema. So it's a really natural place to have both English and Japanese. In Like a Dragon, it's completely different in both English and Japanese. So like if you play the English, you're gonna get a different feel than the Japanese. But all the topics they chose, they cleverly, in my opinion, they cleverly chose topics that face both Americans and Japanese. Things like video game humor, going to a movie. It focused on friendship, like the awkwardness. Americans are like the awkwardness of friendship honesty. So the delivery is written in that way. And then Japanese are more like a matter of fact, very reliant and trusting. And they all had context that it didn't feel unnatural. So it didn't have something like a great example that I typically use when things are lost in translation is expressing something that's inherently Japanese, which does happen. All of Kiryu Saga, most of Kiryu Saga, expressing something that's inherently Japanese and expecting an English voice cast to figure out how to express that feeling in English. It would be very difficult. For example, expressing all the hostess stuff. That's gonna come out really weird. Like it's a different take on it. So they would have to rework a lot of the things, like how the animation works and whatnot, because that type of interaction, like a hostess club in the United States, there's no point. There aren't very a lot of point of reference in the same context and the same feel. So if you dubbed over it, like if they went back and dubbed like Kiwami 1, a lot of that stuff can be very difficult because there's going to be lost in translation. Those sentiments are not referenced or normalized in English. In all these games now, they have to be worried about that because if you don't, then often you reinforce that stereotype where, like, for example, if you watch your favorite anime or something and there's no representation or reference in English, then you dub over it. It will feel like the English is trying really hard to be the Japanese counterpart, but it has no counterpart. So then often the situation is you listen to the Japanese because the show was written with Japaneseisms, like Japan culturalisms in it. And that can be really tough. But they did really well in Yakuza Like a Dragon. And I'm looking so forward because how well they did there means that Hawaii is going to be a blast. Because I'm waiting to see how clever they can become to maybe even putting in an Asian American for the first time. Like not a American Japanese person, but in where the base culture is American as opposed to like a Americanized person. And I'm curious how good their staff and stuff are. The translations are so good in this game. Like what I mean is the localization is so good. Their attention to detail is fantastic. Like one of the biggest ones that I give them props for is in order to you played Kiwami 1. Oh, you played Yakuza 0. So Yakuza 0 highlights the difference between Kansai and Tokyo, right? The Tokyo region and Kansai. Kansai is often viewed as the countryside, the rural side of things, like the more quaint and bumpkin side of things. So if you look at the subtitles, right, the localization, what they did was they add all the mannerisms of the countryside of the United States. You know, yaw, non-traditional contractions versus the north side, which is where my English comes from, my American English comes from. So I don't usually use truncations like what Saejima uses and Majima uses. But in order to demonstrate the relationship between Tokyo and Kansai, and then other regions, they actually expand to other regions. The specific one is the Kansai accent that they keep highlighting, and then the Tokyo accent, and that relationship is much like the countryside versus the metropolis like areas, which typically in the United States is more focused on the south versus the north. And they inherently reflect that. And it's great. It's one of those little attention to detail that they're trying to capture the same feeling that would be lost in translation if they just translated one for one. Because if they translated one for one, the two areas would sound the same in English because the meaning, the context meaning, like if Saejima said hello and Kiryu said hello back, well, Kiryu is localized to Tokyo accent and Saejima is localized to Kansai accent. So, what will they sound like if you were to translate, like subtitle it? They would both say hello, but they went the extra yard or like the extra. That's kind of funny that I chose the English unit, but yeah, they went the extra mile to make it reflect that it's different accents. So they went ahead and picked the two most obvious separation of accents in America, in the United States, and then wrote the dialogue like that. So then you can understand the feeling that would be lost in translation, which is that, oh, Tokyo people view their dialect as more refined and sophisticated, but cold and unwelcoming and stringent, right? Very polite, proper, professional. Kansai accent is very friendly, casual, lazy, unrestricted, and welcoming. So you get the feeling. So when you think about Saejima and Majima, you think of those like, in at least to an American, you think of Saejima and Majima as like that good old friendly, you know, southern person that wants to hug you and offer you some meal, you know, like hospitality as an American reading in. And then when you think of Tokyo people, you think of businessman, hustle bustle, straightforward, down to business, got to get things done kind of thing. And it reflects on Kiryu side versus like Kiryu and Saejima have their personality and idiosyncrasy and principles are very similar, but they're, because one's from Kansai and one's from Tokyo area, they get that feeling like, oh yeah, Kiryu is a little bit, when he speaks, he's a little bit more refined, direct. And Saejima is more like loosey goosey with like, ah yeah, bro, like, you know, yeah, just it's a, and I hope they continue to do that. Um, they have some inside jokes about English and stuff that Yakuza Like a Dragon does do. There are a few scenes about how Americans view Japanese people and how Japanese view American people. And I imagine they're taking a deeper dive now when they get to Hawaii. I'm not sure if you're American or like you're maybe in a Western world. To me, I'm the East meets West. So this, I'm not Japanese, but I am Chinese. And this stuff comes up a lot. Unfortunately, you know, China is more of a closed country, so I only know as much as my parents impart on me. So I like Japanese stuff since it's more open. But a lot of the isms are the same. Canadian, cool. So yeah, and then you have your subtleties. It would be interesting, you know, if they ever visit Canada and use their localisms, as well as the Asian hubs in Canada, because there are Asian hubs in Canada. Uh, Usually for me, my only experience in Canada when it comes to Asian hubs are, Toronto, around the Montreal area, specifically the Montreal area. It'll be fun to see where they go. Once they get a foothold in the USA and they do well, I think the North American continent is up for grabs. I'm not sure about Latin America, but I think Canada is fair game. And that might bridge to French. I don't, it might bridge some French, touch some Frenchisms.
If I recall correctly,
Anyways,
they call it the
game.
Medical Institute. Is that accurate?
Yeah. They own every last inch of this campus.
It's incredible.
I think it's a way off, for sure. Like for me, Hawaii is almost the furthest removed, but still Asian possible for me. Like New York is just an entirely different beast. And then you have Canada, right? I really like my times. I've been to Canada twice, and specifically when my family go to Canada, it's dealing with Asian hubs. So we would like bounce around Canada's Asian hubs. And this is what they do most of the time, where they take the closest Asian hub and like bridge that way so that it might not be as risky. And Hawaii is one of the states in the United States that is, if one had to take a gamble, it's the closest thing to Pacific Islanders, which I know Japan is not often referred to as a Pacific island, but it's a island nation in the Pacific. So it's like the closest facsimile to it. If they'll ever go mainland and even Canada, I would love them to take that risk. It's super risky though. I would love to see it. I think California is not out of the question because California is West Coast Asians, and they make their way up to Toronto. At least, like Chinatown in Canada, just different Chinatowns in the city. Little Tokyos are less common in the United States. Hawaii might as well be the closest to little Tokyos. However, they can do Chinatowns around the North American continent. So that would include Canada and like the East Coast. There aren't enough big concentrations of Japanese people in the United States outside of Hawaii. And not even Hawaii then.
Even with all these buildings, they're still getting budget to expand from that new drug. So? Is it the same as you remember?
Yeah.
I wonder how far they're going to go into dementia. The dementia has been, if there's anything in my life that's terror, it's dementia. Like cancer is something I'm very familiar with when it comes to my educational background. So because of the familiarity of cancer, it has normalized my emotional stability when it comes to the topic of cancer. But dementia, I have not specialized enough in dementia. It was more of a hobby a cross-discipline hobby when I was in school, when I was at a university. However, just the idea of dementia, specifically this drug, I'm curious if they drop some buzzwords. Buzzwords would be amyloid plaques, typically amyloid plaques are associated with Alzheimer's, which is under the umbrella of dementia. I'm kind of curious if they throw a few like sciencey buzzwords. I'm always open to RGG how they lightly touch on things that are very complex, and then that's where I use it to talk about those deep cuts. I usually use the phrase deep cuts. There are a lot of deep cuts in RGG because they're always scratching the surface of a lot of things. If they go too deep, it can become too gatekeeping. A game like this, if they want to reach to a larger audience, they have to keep scratching surfaces so that they cast a wider net. And if they go too deep, it's a trade-off for maturing your community. But you have to cast a net to develop a large community, then mature the community. So I feel like because of their design language with these recent games, they're trying to expand right now. And then when they expand, maybe there'll be deeper cuts. But in terms of science and medicine, I'm expecting some buzzwords dropped here and there. They've already dropped a few buzzwords. And for politics and like black market stuff and government conspiracy, they dropped a few buzzwords here and there along their series. But they don't get it too dry that it will make it gatekeeping. It will make it gatekeepy. Almost 2 a.m. for me. You're gonna head. Oh yeah, no worries. 2 a.m. Oh, you're on the East Coast. Nice. I'm also on the East Coast. Or you're on the East. I don't actually know how time zones extend to Canada. Does it like go in a little? But you're in my same time zone. Thanks. Thanks for hanging out. I mean, enjoy your sleep. Hopefully, you continue to enjoy RGG. I would love to hear your perspectives from a Canadian perspective on what you think when you continue playing the games. So definitely drop by, feel free. Like, don't forget that Like a Dragon Gaiden is in November. Just got a lot of stuff to experience. So sleep well. Thanks for hanging out. You live 30 minutes from Toronto? Oh man. That's like just nice, you know? You get access to the city, but at the same time be outside of it. You know what I mean? I live outside a major city too. I live outside of Philadelphia. So it's kind of nice that it's nice to have access to a city and not and that kind of thing. Sounds like a good place. Yeah, take care. Thanks for hanging out and listening and sharing. Definitely feel free more to share. Sleep well.